So, okay. Well, hello everyone. My name is Cynthia, and I'm the Employment Equity Campaign Specialist at CASSA. I'm working on the research on employment equity for South Asian communities in Toronto project. Before we get started, I'd like to ask my colleague Miriam for the land acknowledgements, please.
1 second. Hi, everyone. My name is Mariam. I'm the project manager at CASSA. We're so excited to have you all here. So let's begin with this acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that the work of the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians takes place on traditional Indigenous territories of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit. This territory is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This territory is also covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. Today, Takaranto, the traditional Mohawk name of this area called Toronto, which means the place in the water where the trees are standing, and its surrounding areas have always been and are still home to Indigenous people. As we organize, we remind ourselves to respect and nurture our sacred relationship to this land, as well as to its first peoples, both past and present. This specific land acknowledgement also serves as a reminder that we must work to amplify the voices and implement the rights of Indigenous people, as well as work towards understanding the role of Indigenous women in Canada today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Just for time, I would like to start with just giving you a very brief presentation about what our report was. The report was already published back in October. I'm not going to go over the entire report, but only go specifically over what relates to women, just because it's International Women's Day today, and we really just want to focus on women, which doesn't happen most of the time. Okay. I hope everyone can see my screen. So our report was called Moving Towards Decent Employment for South Asian Immigrants in Toronto. The project was a 3-year research project called Research on Employment Equity for South Asian Immigrant Communities in Toronto. They did research for about a year in Toronto on the employment needs, barriers, and recommendations for employment equity for South Asian immigrant communities. With that research, we developed comprehensive key public policy changes and recommendations for business process improvements to help meet the needs and alleviate the barriers faced by South Asian communities. Although our research was really focused on Toronto, but given how diverse most of Canadian cities are, especially the bigger cities, such as, such as Calgary, Montreal, Vancouver, all of our recommendations can also be applied to those cities. These are some of the key barriers and challenges that we recognize for the South Asian community as a whole. However, I would like to focus on women today. So South Asian women face compounding barriers to securing decent employment. They are discriminated at a much higher rate in the workforce as compared to white men, South Asian men, and white women as well. Some of the barriers, some of the specific barriers that they face are there are language barriers, limited transportation, childcare responsibilities, difficulty in accessing technology and navigating online spaces. They tend to be the primary caretaker of the family in many South Asian immigrant families, which doesn't just mean children, that they're just only taking care of their children or their husbands. They also tend to take care of parents, of in-laws, of any other extended family that does come visit. So there's quite a bit of a responsibility on them. In the workplace, female clients also generally face more bullying, harassment, and racism than their male counterparts. The gender race wage gap also continues to persist. So a racialized woman earns 58 cents to every $1 earned by the non-racialized male counterpart. A bit more about the barrier. So language barrier is huge for all South Asian immigrant communities. However, it does disproportionately affect women because most of the time they don't have that kind of fluency in English. They are very fluent in their own mother language. Even if they do tend to have an accent, and because of that, they face a lot of discrimination. disproportionate childcare responsibilities. As I mentioned before, it's not only just childcare, it's also they are the primary caretaker of the family. So it's also their husbands, their parents, their in-laws, their extended family. They also face the gender wage gap, as I mentioned before. Limited transportation is also a big barrier. So a lot of the time, South Asian immigrants do not have licenses, or they don't, if they don't live sort of in central Toronto, if they live in suburbs or somewhere else, they might not have direct access to buses, the metro. Because of that, it becomes very difficult for them to actually even sort of go access any kind of resources that's available for them at agencies, or even go for job interviews. Or sometimes a lot of the jobs rely on public transportation, on having transportation if they have cars and things like that, which they don't. And then of course women are disproportionately affected by it, because even if someone does have a license or someone does have a car, if they can only afford one car, that usually goes to the male of the family, and they have to rely on them for transportation. They face both race and gender discrimination in the workplace and in every other aspect of their life. A lot of people actually believe, a lot of the South Asian immigrants that we interviewed, a lot of them felt that because even if they knew English, because of their accent and because of their names, they had a 30% less chance of being called back for an interview or being offered the job. So that's definitely a big aspect. And then difficulty navigating online resources. A lot of the resources today in finding jobs, such as even just templates for your resumes or cover letters, or even accessing jobs and applying to them, is all done online these days. So a lot of them, especially the older South Asian communities and especially women, they don't have that sort of knowledge about how to navigate the online space, even something as simple as LinkedIn, which a lot of them do not have. So how do we get them on it? How do we make the internet space more accessible for them? Because all hiring, all jobs, all career exploration is happening on it these days. So some of the suggestions that we had for newcomer and employment agencies were that, first of all, we need to have more affordable education and training programs. So a lot of employment agencies are offering some education and training programs because, their South Asian immigrants' education and training isn't really recognized, or non-Western experience isn't very recognized in Western spaces. We need to have affordable childcare, and this will really help women specifically because even if they need to attend school, they need to attend ESL classes or any kind of training institution. A lot of the times they're not able to do so because they have the responsibility of a child, or the child doesn't go to school or anything like that. Some greater networking opportunities. And this also actually goes into the LinkedIn and the online space, because a lot of them don't really know how it works these days, and how networking works, especially with COVID-19, now that all of it is online. And how do you network effectively on LinkedIn and on other sort of, there's that 1,000 Coffee space and all these other career spaces. And lastly, we need culturally appropriate mental health support. Immigrating to a new country is very draining. It's very hard. And a lot of the times, especially if you don't have any sort of financial support, if you came in your country, you were really well educated, you had a good job, a lot of times that doesn't translate in Canada. They face a lot of barriers. And because of that, mental health support, and you've left your family. So we really do need very culturally appropriate mental health support that understand the kind of barriers and difficulties that immigrants face. So finally, just to give a very short outlook on what we have done in these past about 6 to 8 months, has been that, so we published our report, we disseminated it, we sent it to a bunch of other advocacy agencies, and we shared our findings with them. We had a lot of emphasis on social media marketing. So from posters, we're doing this series called Define It series, because a lot of the times people don't even know what the meaning of simple things such as employment equity is, or the gender wage gap is. So we're trying to bring more awareness around those terms. We also have a lot of targeted videos that we're doing, which is on TikTok and Insta Reels. We're sharing not just what CASSA is and what CASSA does through those videos, but also our specific projects. And for our project, we're sharing the kind of barriers that they face, the kind of recommendations that we have. We've also created a business charter for small and large businesses, two separate ones. And we're going to be disseminating it at the end of this month to have them sort of almost pledge to a few of the criteria that we have written, which will support South Asian and racialized communities. And lastly, we are actually also going to be having a webinar with government ministers, MPPs, policymakers on March 24th, where we will be sharing specifically the key policy recommendations. So everyone is invited to it, of course. I can send everyone a link if needed. If just for the report, if Mariam, if you could please put the link to the report in the chat, that would be great so everyone could see it. And yeah, in conclusion, CASSA was founded in 1980s with sort of the goal of helping out immigrants with credential recognition. The fact that after 3 decades, this is still an issue and we're still doing a project on it is quite telling, and that really a lot of changes are needed, not only in our business process system, but also in the government to help South Asian immigrants and other racialized communities fight this kind of systemic racism so that they're able to have meaningful and decent employment. Just sort of a brief overlook of what our project was and why we're doing this today, because we really wanted to focus on, of course, South Asian immigrants and sort of the struggle that they have in finding work in Canada, but also how that is so disproportionate and so heightened for women. So with that, I would like to please invite Yamna to start the panel. And if we could have sort of a nice, fruitful discussion going on about it.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Of course, so without further ado, I'll start the panel discussion. We have a lot of different speakers today. Thank you all for being with us. We have Dr. Sadeep Manhas, we have Dina Lad, Sultana Jangir, Madhvir Bango, and Avigo as well. We'll start with Dr. Sadeep Manhas. Dr. Sadeep is the Executive Director at the Settlement Assistance and Family Support Services, short for SAFS. Prior to her joining SAFS, she was the Executive Director at an agency in Windsor for over 10 years. She's been on the Board of Directors and the Executive Board for CASSA and other social service agencies as well. She taught feminist theory, cultural studies, and identity politics for 19 years at one of India's premier universities before migrating to Canada. She has actively participated in public policy dialogue around issues of social inclusion, intersectionality, and newcomer settlement. Her work has provided her with the opportunity to acquire an understanding of the realities, issues, challenges, and concerns of our communities, especially immigrants and refugee women.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you going to ask the question or do you want me to read it?
Sorry, I can ask you the question.
Thank you, because I don't have it up on my screen.
No worries. So accessing resources is a major barrier that South Asian immigrant women and racialized women face due to childcare responsibilities. So not having proper transportation, not being proficient in English, or not knowing how to access resources that are internet-based, etc., are a lot of the barriers that they face. What steps can be taken to ensure that these women are able to access the resources available to them to enrich their portfolio and prepare them for the Canadian job market?
Thank you so much. You know, I've really tried very hard thinking about an answer. And I don't think this has an answer. It's a very, very complicated issue, and it requires an approach, a process, but not really an answer. So to get to that process, I'm going to start with a tiny story of many, many years ago. So I was 10 years old, running around. It was a school athletic meet. And of course, schools in India, not all of them, at least the one that I went to, run by Irish fathers and nuns. And so we had houses, you know, representing different sections. And my house was lagging, but I was running around trying to get as many medals as possible. I do that, and the house wins. I'm 10 years old, have no idea, you know, what that date was or what the importance of that date was, but I had two young women teachers talking to a male colleague and saying, isn't it interesting that the year and the date, of course, it was declared as by United Nations as the International Women's Day, that this girl would, help make it possible for the whole house to win the championship, the annual championship. Didn't understand at that point how my role. I mean, I would have won it uh, because I was pretty good in sports. I don't know in studies or not, but what was the importance of Sudeep or a young girl winning all those things? What was the relevance? I later on I was able to kind of think about it, and I've always um, I'm still puzzled. Is the utilitarian aspect? So my utility that day to win it for the house was the most important thing. And of course, the house had boys and girls. It was, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mention, it was a co-education institution where the girls were only about 5 to 10% of the school population. It wasn't very common in those days for missionary convent schools to have co-education. However, that was one of them. And I insisted that I actually go to a co-ed because I didn't find sports challenging enough in other schools. So really, women have been called to perform for uh, in any field for the benefit of the patriarchal system. And we have a history of that from the two world wars when women were asked to come out of the home space and work outside from India, or actually the Indian Peninsula's freedom movement. Women were asked to come out and participate in the freedom movement, in South Africa's freedom movement, in 2008 or 6 to 8 when the economic downturn because the manufacturing had collapsed, women were asked. I mean, they basically performed the role of a stabilizer. So women have been valued for their economic input when it comes to be seen as in relation to uh, the patriarchal system, and not for the worth that women might have for themselves. Why do I want to talk about that is that there are two very important elements when we talk about racialized immigrant women's employment within Canada. Number one, we have to recognize that the term immigrant woman, it's a socially constructed and rooted in the economic and legal processes of our society that have sexist, racist, and class biases. So we have to recognize all of those things. When we talk about sexist spaces, we cannot segregate or separate the racist sexist that the mainstream Canadian or the white colonial system has imposed on us. But we also have to recognize the sexist element within our own communities. So access and the barrier to access is not solely a responsibility of what they need to do, but also what we need to do within our own communities. When I was talking about the stabilizers, I'm also going to mention what is happening right now um, during the pandemic. So um, women have lost more jobs compared to men. However, women are also the ones who are employed in the most precarious conditions. So they are, um, you know, they are working within the um, as PSWs, as cashiers. I mean, the 5 Cs that we normally talk about as cashiers. So they're the frontline workers. They are in the health industry, but, and I'm talking about immigrant women, but mainly as care workers, not as the ones who could, have any other kind of a power. So they get impacted by the kind of work that they are performing. They get impacted by the low earning, precarious wages that they're earning. And then they also end up coming home to child care as well as homeschooling. So they are practically doing 3 jobs. One, outside, precarious condition. Two, within the household. Now, if we were to actually divide that up, it is really 33% versus 66%. 66% of the oppression is within the home. So we have to approach that along with the 33% that is outside, not to in any ways minimize the impact of the um, what we call is the intersectionality of racism as well as of patriarchy and misogyny a lot of times. So I'm not underestimating that as well, that at all. However, what I'm trying to talk about is that it has to be a multi-pronged approach, an approach where the communities themselves begin to see that these are the same resources. And I'm going to talk about childcare a little later. I hope I'm not going over my allotted time. Can you let me know if how
You're
much
good.
longer do I have?
Yeah, you still have about 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. Remember, I was a professor, so I can jump over a lot of things and go on and on. So, okay, I'm trying to compress it, and I've lost my train of thought. Anyways, keeping the intersectionality as well as the oppressions that immigrant and racialized women are facing within the Canadian society, we also have to recognize the patriarchal and misogynistic systems that are in prevalence within our own communities. And therefore, when I talk about the multi-pronged approach, the approach has to be when we ask a question around childcare, that is a barrier. Why is it a barrier only for women? We are unfortunately combining uh, women only within the role of nurturers. So they are the ones who ultimately get, clubbed together with if children need care, if children need taken care of, then it's women's role. So if we don't have universal universal childcare, therefore women are the ones who will stay back. But that never becomes an impediment when men do need women to come out and work. Another element about how women can overcome these barriers is to understand the systemic role of oppressions. Whenever we talk about systemic roles, I've noticed that we look at systems as if um, they are without human agents. We just look at systems as, and the best way to talk about that is when we talk about bureaucracy, where a man or a woman would say, well, that is how the things are. No system or no bureaucracy exists without the human element, the human action behind it. So and Foucault would talk about that the power is not inherently situated within the institutions without a human element. So there has to be an actor or the subject really who's acting on that power, and there has to be the other on who that power is being subjected. How do you deconstruct and dismantle that is holding anybody within the systems that we were talking about power, holding them as personally responsible for the actions that come out. So if we do not have universal childcare, or if we do not have um, programs where we can provide affordable childcare, affordable transportation, or even the internet access that I was, um, hearing in the report, holding people who make those decisions responsible as personal actions is how we can hope to have that kind of a change. So I'm just going to wrap it up. I know I was talking about a lot of things all at the same time because it's a very complex question. It's not that one day I can say, okay, if you can start link, just like link classes, if you start link classes, the language barriers will be overcome. The barriers are so multifaceted that we actually need to approach that from a multi-pronged um, or from many different directions. So whenever we approach any barrier, we also have to have, so we need to have an eye outward as well as an inward. So we need to look at our own communities as well as what the Canadian system is providing us. If our own community gets behind women into getting all of these things, we might have, conquered at least 66% of the problem. That's why I was splitting it up, the three pronged, um, or the three elements of what women were being dragged into right now during the pandemic is the precarious work outside, homeschooling for children, and then the other household stuff. So that 66% at the home also has to be at the forefront when we are talking about how programs need to change. Questions, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Minhas. That was a great answer. We loved your story in the beginning and how it just forced you to think about why it's such a big deal when a girl or a woman makes some sort of an achievement in a very male-dominated field. We'll have questions in the end. We have an entire 20 minutes for questions in the end. Yamna, if you could please introduce our next speaker, Dina Ladd.
Of course. So please allow me to introduce Dina Ladd. Dina has been working to improve wages and working conditions in sectors of work that are dominated with low wages, violations of rights, discrimination, precarious and temporary work for the past 28 years. She has worked to support and develop grassroots trainings and organizing with groups such as the Fight for 15 and Fairness campaign and the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. Dina is one of the founders and the executive director of the Toronto Workers Action Centre. The Workers Action Centre organizes to improve wages and working conditions with low-wage workers, women, racialized and immigrant workers in precarious jobs that face discrimination, violations of rights, and no benefits in the workplace.
Thank you. The question for Dina that we have is that so many South Asian immigrant and racialized women face huge barriers in entering their field of experience and education in Canada. They are pushed into precarious, low-wage work or are being misclassified as self-employed, so they have no labor rights. What are some of the ways that South Asian immigrant and racialized women can fight back against this discrimination and the cycle of precarious work?
Great, thank you. Not an easy question to answer, that's for sure. But first of all, I wanted to wish everyone a happy International Women's Day. I think that it's important to recognize all of the hard work that went into the report, and I'm sure all the women that organized this meeting and wanting to have this conversation. So thank you for inviting me. I think that, I don't think it's probably a surprise to any of us on this call or in this meeting about the incredible important role that women of color have played, especially immigrant women and women from our communities during the pandemic. We've seen women doing essential work such as working in the food processing factories, working in manufacturing, working as personal support workers, nurses in healthcare, retail. I mean, all of these, working at Tim Hortons, working in all of these jobs that have been absolutely essential. But, this is not new. I mean, before the pandemic, I think all of us know the histories of our families, of many of the people that we know in our communities, what they've faced coming into Canada, the barriers they've faced, the systemic racism, discrimination, sexual harassment, all of the ways in which women have been denied their ability to thrive in the communities here in this country. And so what I want to do is talk about so to me, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the conditions, because I think we've seen story after story, article after article, heartbreak after heartbreak of all the women in our lives and all the women we work with in our communities, and all the daily indignities, disrespect, devaluing of who we are in our communities. And it's been devastating, and it's been devastating for decades, for years and years and years. And we've seen the toll that's taken on our people. And so I don't want to talk about the conditions anymore. I'm sick of talking about the conditions. I've been talking about the conditions for the last 30 years that I've been an organizer. I think if people don't know what the conditions are, then they've got their head in the sand and they don't bloody know what they're doing. I think it's so clear. How many reports have we had detailing in detail the absolute discrimination and barriers over and over and over again before this pandemic? And of course, the pandemic made it more stark, exposed it in a deeper way, but it was always there. It's been there. If you chose not to look at it or understand it, pay attention to it, actually give a damn about it. And frankly, the governments have not wanted to care about it because our communities have been invisible. They don't care about the women traveling on the TTC to people's homes doing home care or doing childcare or working at Tim Hortons. They haven't given a shit about that. The only reason that they will give a damn about anything is if we organize and make it so. That is the power of what I want to talk about today. And I think that, we know that the labor laws are outdated. Before this pandemic, before, 2018, before the Ford government came into power, there was like a 10-year struggle to challenge precarious employment. At one of the press conferences that I organized in 2018, when I knew Doug Ford was going to roll back the bare bone legislation that we had done to start to tackle precarious work, we had 3 to 4 banker boxes filled with reports, and we put them on the desk, and there was nearly 6 foot tall, right? Of report after report of talking about precarious employment, of talking about the gaps in protection, of talking about all the ways in which women of color essentially have been denied any justice in the labor market and have been treated invisibly as flexible labor and have been completely exploited and devalued. And so when we had that pile of reports, we said, we are not interested in doing any more research. We're not. Our people have been researched to death. How many more surveys do we have to fill out to tell you how shitty our lives are? Forget about it. Do something. And I think that, we fought so hard for Bill 148 to get the minimum wage up to 15, to ensure that women had scheduling rights, that, my goodness, that they could actually get their schedules a week in advance so that they could plan their lives and juggle childcare, that, wow, we could have equal pay for equal work, that women didn't have to be discriminated against. We won all those changes. We won paid sick days. This was one of the biggest things that women had talked about as care workers, to say, I am responsible for taking my parents to medical appointments. I am the one that has to take days off work when my kid is sick. I don't have anybody else to do this. I desperately need paid sick days. I need to be able to do this because it always falls on me. And so we won this. And then the government came in and people were so afraid of fighting back, they rolled over this legislation. And we entered this pandemic weak, with very poor labor laws, with no paid sick days, with no scheduling rights, with no equal pay for equal work. We entered this pandemic at the worst possible way. And what did we find? We found long-term care. I'll give that as one example. How many people have died in long-term care? Our elders have died. Thousands of people have died. Women have become sick. The stress of working in these kinds of conditions, and everyone's been like, oh, this is so crazy. How could this have happened? This has been coming to the forefront for years, but it's just been ignored. And so all of the conditions in long-term care, part-time work, low wages, no health and dental benefits, no paid sick days, the absolute inequality of wages based on what you're called. You know, we had a woman speaking at a press conference about 2 or 3 weeks ago. She works as a dietary assistant in the long-term care facility. She's worked there for 2 years. She has no health and dental benefits. She has no paid sick days. She is called a part-time worker, but during this pandemic, she has consistently worked full-time hours, but she's denied any benefits because she's a part-time worker, or you get called a temporary permanent worker, or a permanent casual worker, or a leaf worker. These are all words to basically deny you your proper wages. And so all of those conditions in long-term care, all of those toxic ingredients that have led to so many deaths, that is exactly the same conditions in the warehouses and the food processing factories and the manufacturing facilities in Peel and in Scarborough. Those are exactly the conditions that women are facing in their work through temporary agencies. Many of those conditions are in childcare centres and in all the other workplaces where, oh my God, there's been a COVID outbreak. Well, no kidding, because nobody has a voice in those facilities. And so those conditions are embedded in our labor market. And so in order to affect change, we need to tackle these issues at the root cause. We are not going to change these conditions by policy reports. I really, really wish that it was a different answer, but that's not what's going to happen. Just even take the issue of paid sick days, a vital protection for workers right now in the pandemic. Paid sick days during a worldwide pandemic, and the Ford government refuses to enact them. It is going to take a powerful mass movement to challenge this government and to challenge those corporations that decide that our lives are disposable, and that they're okay to dispose of us in the quest for profit, especially when we look at long-term care. Those for-profit companies that have passed over millions of dollars to their shareholders, where is their accountability? Why haven't those millions of dollars been taken away? Yet all we're asking for is 10 paid sick days so that people can stay home if they're sick. They can get a COVID test. They can take care of their child so their child doesn't go to school and then infect other children, and then those children go home and infect their families. Every medical officer has talked about the need for paid sick days. We've had medical officers talk about precarious employment. We've had medical officers talk about the systemic discrimination and racism in the labor market and how women of color have been on the essential front lines. So there's nothing more to really say except to organize. And so what I'm saying is that all of us need to get involved and organize. And we have to do this with incredible confidence, with the power, and to know that we are not going to get sucked in by playing these silly games that the government asks us to play anymore. We've played them for years. We've done deputation after deputation. We've done briefings after briefings. We've wrote reports. We've been nice. It's not worked. And so what I'm saying to you is that we need to have our collective organizing and strength from our communities, get involved in campaigns such as paid sick days, in campaigns where we are pushing for systemic solutions, not for little crumbs from the government, but for some real solutions that will not make our communities vulnerable. We need fair immigration laws that do not bring women into this country indentured to corporations and to families and who are doing care. and who can be deported just like that if they speak out against working conditions. That is absolutely unacceptable. So we have a status for all campaign, and we're saying to the government, yeah, you bring people into work, but you give them PR. And if they're good enough to come into this country to work, they're good enough to stay. Don't you be just sending them back after 2 years or making them work and live in abusive working conditions. We need a decent agenda for work. But we can come up with all the agendas and demands we want, but unless our communities unite and fight for this, we're not going to see the changes that we want. The changes that we've gotten have become because we've actually fought like hell for them on the streets. And we haven't, and it hasn't been through all of the ways in which they want it to be. Right now, we have a momentum building around paid sick days. We have so much support. Where is our community in pushing for that? Where are the letters to the editor? Where are the calls to the MPPs? Where are the calls to the business people to say, you better put in paid sick days. We're not going to take this anymore. We've pushed small businesses to come out in support of this. We've pushed the mayors, the medical officers, city councillors. We've pushed all of the different unions to speak up on this. We need our community, immigrant communities, also fighting, because this ultimately is going to benefit us. So I guess I just want to say that, if we really want to deal with these systemic discriminatory practices, if we really want to tackle precarious employment, we are going to have to fight for it like hell. We have a challenge before us, but I'm not willing to. I think many of us have come to a point where we've had enough. The time is now. We have to actually organize apartment building by apartment building, street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood, and show the power of our communities to actually have repercussions for these people who are going to turn their backs. We have MPPs in our communities who have voted against paid sick day legislation. How are we holding them accountable? They're going to hope that we forget in June 2022 when they're going to be asking for a vote. And they're going to be creating some sort of distraction like sex education or something else to say that's the real problem, but not me. I'm there for you. We're family. So I think part of this is about political education in our communities and about learning how to fight back and about having the power and confidence to take on the government in a way, because otherwise they are not going to listen to these systemic changes, and they're not going to want to do what's good for our communities. We know what's good for our communities. We live there, we see them every day, we hear the heartbreak, the pain, we know what's going on. And so it's our responsibility to now be an effective movement to get that change. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dina, for that really inspiring response. So I think we'll move on to Sultana Jahangir. So Sultana has been a social service worker and social justice advocate for 25 years in Bangladesh, the US, and Canada. After immigrating to Canada, she lived in Toronto's East Danforth area, which has a high concentration of low-income immigrant families, mostly Bangladeshi immigrants. Sultana led immigrant women from area to create their own organization, South Asian Women's Right Organization. Since 2007, she has served as a South Asian Women's Right Organization's executive director. Under her leadership, this organization has developed effective programs to reduce community poverty and empower women and girls. As a leader of the Gender Equality and Network Canada, Sultana also brings significant experience working for women's equality in her community across a wide range of fields.
The question that we have for Sultana is, what are some policy and legislation changes as well as business process improvements that the government and businesses can undertake to not only ensure that South Asian immigrant women are not discriminated against, but also support their rights?
Happy International Women's Day to all the women, strong women. I'm very, very happy to hear Sudeep and Dina. What a fiery speeches both of you are giving. And yeah, Sudeep, you talk very nicely about that issue that we face intersectionality, and Dina, you just inspiring us to move from the community on the street and demanding the justice for everyone, demanding the equality for women. So we just want to say that I have been working in this community, Bangladeshi community, for last 12 years with this organization in Canada. But before I came in Canada, I was working in US, and I was also working as a student advocate in Bangladesh when I was a student. Every sector, I feel it like from uh, my born. I think like I have to fight for my every right. Like the women born to fight. Without the fight, we cannot achieve anything. Like you want to walk in the street, like walking, you need to fight, because you need to fight to get the right to walk, that no one will going to see you like women, because everyone will going to see you as a woman, but you want them to see you as a human. So like these are the fight we started when we born, and we do this fight until we die. Like the way the society structure us, like we born to be caring and taking care of the others, and we will going to be tolerate all of these things. You have to be patient, you should not raise your voice, you are uh, kind of like a plant that you need support to grow up. You cannot be stand on your feet and say that I want to be grow like a tree, I want to grow like a tree and give the shade. So these are the society's structure that women get it when they're born from Bangladesh to Canada. So these women, when they come in here, they come from a society where they find it out that they are very, very dependent. When they come in here, they bring their education and everything. Come, most of the Bangladeshi communities, people are coming as a skilled worker. Women come as a spouse. Their education and skills are giving utilize some number to them. So when they come in Canada, they find two kind of underemployment. One, underemployment, that they don't get their education related job or no recognition. Another, underemployment, forced to work in the lowest precarious sector, and where they find it out, they treat like a slave. They are disposable worker, that Dina late said, that they are using us and then they throw in the waste basket. They don't care about the right and everything. Very inhuman condition. And this is under the down the Canadian standard life. Like the precarious labor market is a hell, because I heard it from the women every single day. You have to wake up early in the morning, put your feet in the shoes, and wait for the employer call. On call work harassment. When they call you, then you will go for work. And when you are not getting called that day, you don't have an income. You don't know end of the month how you earn, how much you earn. You don't know end of the month how much you work. Every single day you have to think about your childcare, because you are not eligible for childcare subsidy, because you cannot work 25 hours in a week, because the market is not very precarious. So it's not your fault, but you are going to affect it. So like full funding of low income women childcare subsidy. How long we are fighting for this thing? Last 40 years we are fighting for the universal childcare. It's right now 50 years, because I came in Canada when first 10 years before. That times I heard it first time that people are fighting for childcare, full funding for childcare for 40 years. Now it's half of the centuries we are fighting for universal childcare. Why it's not coming still in the society? It is like we don't have resource. No, it is a political game. It's the lack of political will. And we talked right now this systemic, that Dina said that before the pandemic there is another pandemic, that is the poverty pandemic, affected the racialized people living in a kind of crowded house, intergenerational house. It's not like we like to do this thing, we do it because we don't have any resource. So we live in a poverty, we eat all this unhealthy food, we stay in an unhealthy house, we because the rent is so high, we fight for the decent job, we fight for the all of the childcare issue and everything. Nothing came out. And I agree with Dina that how many research you needed. Every single times when we talk about the problem, first times is coming, okay, let's do the research to find it out the scale of the problem. And when the scale of the problem find it out, that times we find it out that the solution are not getting implemented. Everyone know that what they should do in right now. The decent labor law is not like kind of, skyrock. We cannot do it. Yes, we can do it. The government will be the referee between the employer and employee. So policy should has to come in here that the employer cannot hire the people without giving them the full 8-hour shift. Employer should not hire people without giving their health and other benefit. There will be sick day, sick pay day, because it's human fundamental right. There will be like decent pay, living wage, not like 14.25, because if you earn 14.25, you cannot pay your rent. How you are going to pay your food? So the minimum wage should has to be very close to the living cost. That right now we're going to say $18. Okay, the pandemic is coming, so everyone get panic. It's a disaster, and now the Toronto Public Health, every department, even the CIBC Bank also reported that the pandemic hit the racialized women very hardly, and 50% job are coming from this precarious retail sector. And the condition of the long-term care healthcare, I just said that I have lots of living example that still people are working from one long-term care to the another long-term care to bring the bread and butter in the house. Still are not getting that things that those who are going to work in the long-term care, they are going to get 8 hours flexible shift to work over there to bring the enough money to the house. So government playing kind of hide and seek role. Whatever the things is exposed, that's a guacamole. They're just been hitting one time, another things is out. So hitting one time, another things, and every time, distracted us not to focusing on the issue to talk and make the solution. So like these are the problem. Yes, people wants to come outside. Yes, people wants to fight against this thing, but people need to fight every single day for their bread and butter. The fear is in here. The immigrant are always feel fear that if I talk, my status might be affected. Where I'm going to find it out the job? If I talk, the employer will going to be, employer will going to be fire me. They don't have any protection. They don't have any union. We demanded that there should be another body to support the low wage precarious worker to get some kind of defense. So that body could be a worker center, could be South Asian Women's Rights Organization, those who are going to be authorized by the government to talk on behalf of them. Because every time when I go to the Ministry of Labor and say that these are the person not getting payment for last 6 months working and she did not get her payment, then the Ministry of Labor asks me who you are. And that is the problem. Third party's intervention is not recognized. The worker should has to go by themselves and defend for the right. And worker anonymity is not getting protected. So how the worker can go to fight? Because first day they complain, second day this person is the subject to move. So she will going to lose the job. So like how vulnerable the worker, so they can, how they will going to come out to stand for their right. So the entitlement is here. Yes, you have right to complain to the labor market, Ministry of Labor, but you have to complain by yourself, stand by yourselves. Like when you are beaten every single time by the worker. Total workers and employers between these things in the precarious labor market, manufacturing and retail sector, ruled by a very anti-social body that called staffing agency. This anti-social for-profit is huntering the worker and working for on behalf of the employer to sucking the blood from the worker. Why we need an anti-social body in this society right now to rule? Who the employer pay this anti-social body to beat the worker. So we stand against these things and we feel it like government should have to restrict the operation of this anti-social bodies, staffing agency, how they get licensed. They should be, get some kind of, imposing and restriction, or if it's not working properly, then they should be stopped. So we don't need it. Like we have Employment Ontario, they can do these things to support the employer if they need kind of, temporary workers. So then it will be like a decent way, not going to be beaten the worker. So they will not going to get their payment properly. And we fight again before the Bill 148, that equal pay for equal right. And we fight for the, you know, sick pay days. We fight for the stable hours work. Nothing is happened. And these things cannot happen until the government be restricted to implement this policy. So another things is in here, we find it out that women are working in the lowest precarious sector and not getting enough income, because the employer always call them for sometimes when they need it. Long time before, when the employer need us to work more than 8 hours, 10 hours in a day, and more than these 7 days in a week, that times all worker movement was fighting for a decent work scheduling and overpayment. So 8 hours over, if you work, you will going to get overpayment. That policy was getting stopped by the dog food right now. People are not getting this overtime money anymore. And rather than these things, the policy is like employer will ask you that would you like to work? And if you say yes, then you're going to work with the same amount of salary that you worked before. So this is kind of like grinding the worker. If you are not agree, then you're not going to get a schedule next time. So you're going to work 10 hours with the same rate, not the overtime rate. So another thing is in here, we asked the government, we said that, okay, if you employer need a flexibility because they don't have any business, it's not my fault. So if my schedule is 8 hours and you tell me to work only 6 hours, I need this 2 hours economic disincentiveness. I want these 2 hours, we're going to pay 1.5. That same way they pay the overtime. So our undertime must be paid like this way. So then the employer will going to feel that kind of, discouragement not to use the worker as they want to work. The machine is stop, you go home. It's not my fault the machine is not working. So these are the policy should has to be prepared. So then worker can feel the decent life in here. Everybody deserve a Canadian standard life in Canada. And Canadian standard life is like, I want to work only 8 hours with a decent amount of labor, and then I can bring enough money to pay my rent and food. We don't want that. We want to be a millionaire. Nobody wants these things. A decent life is the Canadian standard life. And when in this International Women's Day, when everyone is talking about these things, that how the racialized people impacted, we just want to tell these things, that this impact is not only for the from this pandemic. This impact is coming from before the pandemic. It is a pre-existing inequality condition that bringing in here. So like, if you want to fix it, give me as the authority. Do not tell us that participatory. Okay, you come in here, Sultan, I want to hear from you, but decision will be on your hand to fix it. No way, that game cannot be work anymore. I need an authority to make the decision. So that is the things we want, that we want to take this recovery part on our hand. So then we can say that here is the part broken, fix like this. And we cannot go back to the pre-existing, systemic way. Like, okay, all things will going to return back the previous way, so that precarious childcare worker, Uber nanny will go one childcare to another childcare to work. They will not going to get any kind of good job. Then precarious worker will going to go to the manufacturing sector and working in unstable sector schedule. And precarious personal support worker and food service worker will go to back to the long-term care, working one long-term care to the another care, another to the another care. That kind of returning back we don't want from the pandemic. We want a new normal. We don't want to go to the previous normal. The new normal must be, we need a stable labor market. We need the employer should has to be restricted by the policy, that they cannot exploit the worker. We want that precarious market should has to be fixed. We want the living wage should has to become 18 or more, because we want the health care for everyone. We want the sick pay for the worker. We want the universal child care for everyone. So we want these things, because otherwise never the gender equality will going to be established. And we really want that community will going to get the benefit from these things. And for the pandemic right now, it's a cessation. So women affected a lot. So until we not get recovery, we need a universal basic income for everyone support. So then we can see that until we make fix the system, so everyone can get a better way to sustain and survive. Am I passing the time?
You're just about, you have 1 minute left.
Okay, so I just want to say special thanks to Dina, special thanks to Sudeep. We would like to working together, and special thanks to CASA, all the young women sitting in here. Let us work together and tell the government that we don't want participation. We want the decision making authority. So we can take the decision how the policy should has to be, how the program should has to be, how the system should has to be. Thank you everyone to give me a chance to talk in this event.
Thank you so much, Sultana, for your input. And I think you made some really, really important points today. So we'll move on to our next speaker. We will leave questions to the end. So if anyone has questions for any of our speakers, we'll have time for that at the end. So our next speaker is Avi Go. So Avi Go is the clinical director of the Chinese and Southeast Asian Legal Clinic, which serves low-income immigrants and refugee clients. Avi has extensive experience with systemic advocacy to promote the rights of marginalized communities. She has made deputations before various standing committees at the Canadian Senate and the Parliament, as well as a number of UN treaty bodies. She has argued before all levels of courts, including the Supreme Court of Canada. In 2007, she co-founded the Color of Poverty campaign to help address growing racial inequalities in Canada. Avi has also received a number of awards, including the Order of Ontario in 2014 and the Federation of Asian Canadian Lawyers Lawyer of Distinction Award in 2012.
The question that we have for Abby is that South Asian immigrant women and racialized women are more likely to face discrimination than their white male or female, as well as South Asian male counterparts. This can range from the gender wage gap to physical discrimination. What are some legal avenues that South Asian and other racialized women can explore to fight against such discrimination?
Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of the IWD event tonight. As mentioned, I'm the clinic director of the Chinese and Southeast Asian Legal Clinic. So we provide free legal services to low-income Chinese, Vietnamese, Laotian, and Cambodian communities in Ontario. But we work very closely with SALCO, the South Asian Legal Clinic of Ontario, on issues that affect our communities. And as also mentioned, we're co-founder of the Color of Poverty, Color of Change, which is a network of organizations and individuals working collectively to advance racial justice and racial equities in Ontario. And my apology for joining late because we're in the middle of a court challenge trying to challenge the provision in the Income Tax Act that denies Canada child benefits to people with precarious status. So I'm sure that's an issue that affects a lot of South Asian women, particularly those with precarious status that I've mentioned just now. So coming back to this, the issue around the pandemic, and I can sense that some of these issues have been mentioned before, that the pandemic has really amplified major racial inequalities in our society in terms of employment, healthcare, access to senior care, housing, access to justice, education, and so on and so forth. And of course, we know that it's not just about the COVID-19 pandemic. It's almost exactly a year ago that the government declared this as a pandemic. But for many Asian Canadians, including Chinese Canadians and South Asians, we also have to contend with the pandemic of racism, which began long before COVID-19 arrived in Canada. But since January of last year, we have seen a rise of anti-Asian hate, and that has been, ignored mostly by the government. And the pandemic has also made visible Canada's hypocrisy towards migrant workers. Their work is deemed essential, yet the workers themselves are treated as disposable. But in the context of employment, I want to quote two studies that were released by Statistics Canada. One was released in August 2020, and it shows that there's been unprecedented increases in unemployment due to COVID-19 economic shutdown, and the impact falls most harshly on racialized communities. So while the national unemployment rate for those aged between 15 to 69 was 11.3% in July 2020, several racialized communities had rates of joblessness significantly above this average, including South Asian at 17.8%, Arab at 17.3%, and Black at 16.8%. The report also found that South Asian and Chinese experienced a much higher increase in unemployment from July 2019 to July 2020 compared to other groups. And according to more recent job numbers from Statistics Canada, at the end of January of this year, Canada's economy had 858,000 fewer jobs than it did before the pandemic, but those job losses are not being borne evenly across the board. And women, especially ones who weren't earning much income to begin with, are bearing the brunt of job losses, and they made up the majority of the workforce in hardest hit sectors like hospitality, retail, and food. And then there was also a new study by RBC that was published last Thursday, looking at nearly 100,000 working age Canadian women who have completely left the workforce since the pandemic started, which means that they are not even trying to get a job anymore. The figure for men is more than 10 times smaller. So, this is a sign that as a whole that women are suffering a much greater loss. And the RBC report also confirms that women of color from the various racialized groups face a much higher employment gap. So for all racialized groups compared to white, the gap is 4.2%. And if you break down by different groups, the figures are for Blacks, 2.6% gap, Chinese, 4.5% gap, South Asian is 5.9% gap, Southeast Asian, 11.8%, and Arab, 13.6%. So these employment gaps are a result of systemic racism in the labor market that pre-existed the pandemic. And apart from higher unemployment rates, racialized group members, including South Asian, also earn less income as compared to white and are more likely to live in poverty as a result. So even if you look at the 2016 census, that was 4 years ago, poverty rate among South Asian was 18% as compared to 14.4% among all Ontarians and 11.5% among white population. But in addition to the systemic discrimination in the labor market that leads to higher unemployment rates, lower incomes, higher poverty rates, South Asians, like other persons of color, also experience discrimination in the workplace because of their race. And for South Asian women, they also have to contend with both sexism and racism. And for those who are Muslims, they also have to deal with Islamophobia. And for individuals who experience discrimination in the workplace, if they're working for a provincially regulated business, they may file an application with the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario. There's also the Human Rights Legal Support Center, who may, in some cases, assist individuals with their discrimination claims. If you work for a federally regulated employer and you have a workplace discrimination complaint, then you have to file your case with the Canadian Human Rights Commission. The commission will review your complaint, and if there's enough evidence, on the face of it, they think that there's a discrimination case, then they will refer the case to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal for hearing. But fighting discrimination is never easy, especially if you're trying to fight racism as a form of discrimination. And although during COVID-19, we have witnessed a lot of incidents of overt, unabashed form of racist attacks on Chinese Canadians, South Asian Canadians, and other Canadians of color, racism in the workplace often manifests itself in a more subtle way. It could be microaggression in the form of some innocuous comment or question, or it could be unequal access to training, leading to a denial of promotional opportunities. But it's rare these days for employers to say to you, well, I'm not promoting you because you are South Asian or because you're a woman. So oftentimes it is very hard to prove that the discrimination you face in the workplace is because of your race or because of your sex. And the human rights system puts the burden on the individuals to prove that they have experienced discrimination, a process that could be very arduous and oftentimes re-traumatizing for the victims themselves. And the individual-based human rights system really isn't equipped at all to deal with systemic discrimination in the labor market, which is responsible for putting racialized groups, including South Asians, in the bottom rung of the economy in Canada. So for this reason, we often talk about advocating for policy changes that will bring about structural equalities in our economy, and not so much just putting the burden on the individuals to prove that they are victims of discrimination. So while the Canadian government is working on a recovery plan from the pandemic, we need to imagine, as the previous has mentioned, what a society founded on justice, equity, and dignity would truly look like. So to that end, our clinic is working with CASSA, SALCO, as part of the Color Poverty, Color Change, to propose a reconstruction and reset plan for Canada, one that will not only address racial inequity, but also lay the foundation for more prosperous and fair society for all of us. So we have called on the Canadian government to adopt a number of initiatives, but I'll just highlight a few here. So first of all, we need to address anti-racism as an issue, as a core issue and the foundation of our country. So on that note, we are calling on the government to create a national anti-racism plan that contains concrete strategies with actionable goals, measurable targets and timetables, and all the necessary resource to deal with relevant forms of racism and facism, including anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Black racism, anti-Asian racism, and Islamophobia. In fact, the current anti-racism strategy at the federal level does not even name or acknowledge anti-Asian racism at all. And on top of that, we want the government to adopt a federal anti-racism legislation so that we can provide a legislative framework and foundation for the anti-racism strategy and the secretariat with dedicated and sustainable funding support. And on the issue around another measure of combating racism is that we need to know what racism looks like. And to do that, we need to mandate the collection of disaggregated race-based data and other social demographic identities to better measure and understand the racial inequitable impacts of government policies, budget allocations, programs, and practices in the labor market and in other areas as well. With that data, then we will have better and more transparent reporting mechanisms and create accountability framework for the use of the data and to improve, so as to improve the outcomes, life outcomes of all racialized groups. We also need specific measures to address systemic racism in the labor market. So to that end, we call on the government to strengthen the Federal Employment Equity Act to ensure that racialized and other equity-seeking groups have equitable access to all labor market opportunities across Canada. But the Federal Employment Equity Act only covers federally regulated industries and the federal government. So for instance, banks are subject to the Federal Employment Equity Act, but in Ontario, 85% of all workplaces are regulated by the Ontario legislation and not the federal legislation. And currently in Ontario, we don't have any employment equity legislation. So we, of course, want the provincial government to have that kind of measures. But given the current government in power, I think it's unlikely that will change anytime soon. But we want to tack on to the opportunities that, probably once in a lifetime opportunities at the federal level, because we know that the Trudeau government has promised to build back better by investing in the economy. And they want to stimulate the economy by, sort of like putting a lot of money so that there will be jobs created. So we need to make sure that those jobs, all the jobs that are created as a result of the new federal investment will be made equally equitable to all racialized groups and other underrepresented groups. So to do that, the federal government have to add employment equity, consistent obligations, and conditionality to all the infrastructure investments and transfer payments to the provinces and territories. And in addition to that, they need to attach community benefits agreements to all the investments and jobs that are created as a result. And it's only through those kind of strong pro-equity and proactive measures that South Asians and other racialized groups can truly achieve what we think we all deserve, and that is an equal and rightful place in Canada, regardless of our status, race, gender, and so on. Thank you.
Thanks, Avi. That was great. Thanks for your insight and outlining some really important initiatives for women and racialized groups. So we'll move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Manveer Bhangu. She is a gender equality advocate, researcher, and community mobilizer. Manveer is the founder and executive director of Ladlia, Celebrating and Empowering Daughters, a nonprofit organization that inspires South Asian daughters of all ages to become empowered individuals through education, engagement, and awareness. She is the manager of operations at Punjabi Community Health Services, where she oversees the mental health, addictions, and geriatrics departments. In 2018, Manveer was honored with Brampton's Top 40 Under 40 Award by the Brampton Board of Trade. She has been involved in various qualitative community-based research projects with the Wellesley Institute, Region of Peel, United Way of Peel Region, and St. Michael's Hospital. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Human Rights and Human Diversity and Criminology from Laurier, and a Master's from McMaster University in Globalization and the Human Condition.
Thank you, Sakshi.
Manveer, just a question that we have for you is that are there any intergenerational impacts of discrimination that South Asian women immigrants face in finding decent employment? And does this perpetuate or reinforce stereotypical gender norms in the community?
Thank you so much, Cynthia, and thank you, Sakshi, again. Before I begin, I just want to say thank you to all the speakers who just went before me. I am not as experienced as you all. You all obviously have a long list of credentials and experiences that you've gone through, and you definitely have more more to contribute to these conversations than I do, but I will take my dig at this question with whatever I've kind of gathered through my work with Laglia and even at PCHS, and just kind of being, you know, a daughter of immigrant parents, and having a mother who came here at the age of 27, but kind of never, you know, had the opportunity to do anything with her life, because of the gender norms and stereotypes that exist. Um, so I'm hoping that I can bring that to this conversation. So um, in terms of intergenerational impacts, of discrimination that South Asian women, immigrant women may face when finding employment, I think a lot of it's kind of already been touched on, you know, by especially when Sultana was speaking, and even, you know, some of the stuff that Dr. Minhas was talking about. Um, I mean, when I think of immigrant women, the first thing that comes to mind is precarious labor, and I think, you know, definitely with this pandemic, that group has been hit the hardest, and we see that in my current work right now with PCHS. I'm also leading the COVID-19 recovery project, and we see the kind of the clientele that we're serving. It's very heartbreaking, you know, because it's people that look like your aunts, that look like your, you know, people in your family, and those are the ones who have been hit hardest by this pandemic. And it's no surprise that, you know, it's the immigrant women who are experiencing this. And even the report that Avi touched on, the RBC economics report, it was found that, you know, women who had arrived in Canada within the last decade were the ones who most likely lost their jobs, because of this pandemic, and 8.6% of them remain out of work. And those who have children are, you know, they're probably not going back to work because of the reality of this. And in terms of intergenerational impacts, I think the list is very long, but I think firstly, gender roles and stereotypes that are passed down through generations, those play a huge role. And we can kind of see this in, even though, you know, we know so many women who are educated and trained, from back home, or even maybe even here, um, they may not necessarily go into career fields that they want to be in, especially when you compare them to their male counterparts. A lot of them may not even be able to work, or may not even be allowed to work, or empowered enough to go to work, because they may be seen as homemakers. Or there's, you know, this perception of, for example, in our work with Lagli, and we talk about this a lot as well, the concept of kind of preparing your daughter to be a proper wife and a proper mother. And sometimes a lot of that doesn't reflect having your own identity or having a career path of your choice. You know, as long as you can cook and clean, and all of those things are there, you are, you know, groomed to be a bride for somebody. So all of those things, I think, play a role here. And I think when it comes to intergenerational impacts as well, like Dr. Minhas had mentioned, a lot of these women are coming from homes where they are oppressed. So, you know, they're not, even though they may have the freedom, or not the freedom, even though they may be able to go to work, they don't have necessarily access to their finances. A lot of the women, I used to work with newcomer women before this role at PCHS, and a lot of them didn't even know how to access their bank cards. You know, a lot of them don't know how to withdraw money or to deposit money. It's what their husbands are kind of taking care of for them, or their in-laws. So they don't necessarily have the financial freedom that you would think that a job would give them. And even the kinds of jobs that they're working in are not safe. And even the one thing that I focus on a lot in my personal work is, although, you know, there's a large South Asian population within Canada, and especially within Ontario, our diaspora is still fairly new, and we do lack a lot of mentorship opportunities, for our young women and girls. Not in the traditional mentorship sense. Obviously, you know, there are people you can connect with on LinkedIn, but I think mentors that you can look at and you know, feel a certain type of connection with, because they may have had serious similar experiences as you. They may have faced discrimination and can tell you about their experiences. And I think we definitely lack that, you know, just in general. I know when I was growing up, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I, like, you know, it was just, you don't necessarily, not everybody has older cousins or older siblings who can kind of guide them. And I think these things really play a role in how women see themselves, and how their mothers may have seen themselves, and how their grandmothers may have seen themselves, and then how, you know, in the future their daughters may see them. So it's definitely a gap that we have, this opportunity to, to network and to find groups of others who you can connect with, who may be able to help you or get you into certain places, and succeed in your desired career paths. Um, I think culturally and traditionally, obviously, and again, this has been mentioned, I think, by every speaker so far. We a lot of us do have the pressure of being a caretaker, and that's not just for children. I think a lot of us, go above and beyond and live in multi-generational homes where we're taking care of grandparents or even just parents. I mean, even pets. I feel like even women are even responsible for the pets in the family, and it's just it's that's just what we're expected to be, caring and soft and gentle. And a lot of us are doing, double, triple shifts when you think about the amount of energy we're putting into these things. Um, we have actually been working with a lot of international students who are often left out of this conversation. And we've been, over the last year, through Lagnia, we've been supporting a lot of them. And we've noticed that for a lot of these women, they are the first ones in their family, they're the first women in their family to have a job or to earn money. And that comes with its own challenges. And, sometimes some of them are coming here to kind of, obviously they're coming as international students, but a lot of them are coming with the desire to stay here beyond their studies and to get their PR cards and then hopefully have their family come join them. And as a result of that, many of them are expected to send money back home, to support their families. And as a result of that, a lot of them are ending up in jobs that are very dangerous, that are cash jobs that they're being exploited in. And we've heard stories of women who have been in abusive situations where they're being taken advantage of sexually. A lot of them are getting into sex trafficking without even knowing that that's sex trafficking. And I think those are all things that we may not see the results of right now, but in a couple of years, I think we will definitely see what happened and how that's going to transpire in the coming years. Um, and it's this concept of women as stabilizers. I think Dr. Minhas put it really well. It's like we're called in when we're needed, but not necessarily when we're wanted. And this whole precarious employment of women putting on, getting ready every morning and not knowing if they're going to be going to work, it's a lot. And I think it takes a toll on a person's health as well, which then has other intergenerational implications on how women, how they are within their families and their households and just in their communities in general. And yeah, I was listening to everybody speak, and I don't want to repeat everything that's already been said, but I would definitely, draw attention to the fact that when we look at immigrant women, when I look at a lot of the young girls that we're working with, young women that we're working with, who are international students, some of these women have never left the villages that they come from. They have never, they've never driven a car, they've never dealt with money. And then all of a sudden they're in a place like Canada where they don't have the skill set that they need to be in the jobs that, they want to be in ideally. They don't know how to necessarily network and they don't know who to reach out to. And I think that's the scary part. And there's a large population, a growing population of that. And it's scary to think that they're obviously being manipulated and they're being taken advantage of in so many different ways. And they're really, really vulnerable. And I think that's what's at stake here, especially with this pandemic, if things don't change. We do run the risk of kind of losing a whole generation. This opportunity that we have to create some intergenerational transformation. I think we're at the risk of losing all of the work that we have been doing if serious action is not taken. And it's great to see how many South Asian girls and women are at the forefront of this now. It's absolutely amazing when I hear older women who are older than myself speak. It's so nice to see, and I just hope that we can inspire more women in the community to stand up and kind of join this conversation um, and kind of demand what's theirs. And it's your basic human right to have decent employment and to have sick days and to have and to have resources in the community, services in the community that you can access, whether, you can drive a car or not, which is another thing that we've seen. A lot of younger international students have reached out and said, I don't know how to get my license. I'm really scared. I don't want to get my license. Whereas we see their male counterparts, as soon as they arrive, they get a car. And that's obviously depriving these young women of a lot of opportunities, which the men are not necessarily deprived of, or are able to go after. Even something as simple as, getting an opportunity to deliver food via Uber Eats and earn a living that way. A lot of these young girls don't even have that. So, slowly but surely, we're doing our part to kind of raise awareness around these issues when it comes to that. And I think in terms of gender roles and stereotypes, as much as I hate it, I think we ourselves do perpetuate this concept of the South Asian community being very patriarchal, which obviously our roots are, that is what, the roots that we have. But I think there's a lot of great stuff that's happening on the ground too, that we can kind of learn from and change the narrative. And I think it's in our hands to change the narrative around what we, who we as South Asian girls and women actually are, and what we're capable of. And there's so many great things happening. You see people starting their own initiatives and all of that these days, and the media, the power of social media as well. So yeah, I just got my cue for 5 minutes left, but that's all I had. And I apologize if I didn't do justice. I had a lot to, that I had to, there was a lot of greatness before me. So thank you once again to CASSA for inviting me to speak today. And thank you to everybody else who shared their thoughts before me.
Thank you so much, Manri. That was great, and and you did talk about the gender norms and how much work is being done. And I love that you brought the voice of international students into this too. I think we do overlook them quite a lot. Um, so if there are any questions, if we have some time for Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, please, you can raise your hand or you can type it in the chat box, whatever you prefer. I do know some people did leave. I think there's like so many International Women's Day events today. If there aren't, we can also just everyone can just email me for questions or anything. That's completely fine. Give a moment.
I'll ask a question. Actually, not a question, more like a suggestion. I thought maybe let's get the ball rolling. Manveer, let me tell you, there is no greatness, for all of us. We just have had more years than you. So, and you collect more dust along the way. You did a very good job. I was just thinking, especially for international students and international girls, why not start? Because if it has to be about the things and the changes that we can do or the programming, why not have driving classes by peers? And you have a lot of driving institutions in Brampton, or just get them and ask them to actually pitch in one driver a week. That can be their donation to the agencies around there, and get it only for international students, the girls, and get them a lot of training so that they don't feel that kind of lack of confidence. Because another thing that is happening is, again, patriarchal systems. You have sheltered life because women are supposed to be the keepers of the family's respect. That is typical of South Asia. So if they have to be protected, then they're also sheltered from really experiencing what needs or the things that are required when you have to step out. Confidence is a matter of, it's not about your capacity, it's about what you have experienced. So that lack of really having that outside experience, or even driving or getting into a vehicle, all of that counts as kind of is seen as lack of experience. And then of course It's just a bad cycle that goes on and it spirals downwards.
Yeah, I completely agree, and thank you for sharing that. We have actually talked about some sort of a program, like you mentioned, like a peer-led group for for these international students. Right now, everything is closed, but hopefully, when things open up, to kind of reach out to maybe even a female. We met one in my life. I've only met one female instructor, female driving instructor who owns a driving school. I'm sure there's more. And we've asked her to be a mentor for our mentorship program because we thought even that is, very unique career paths to go into for women. And we did talk about kind of asking her to offer some advice. So I think once things open up again, that would be definitely something we are looking into doing. I think Sultana was going to say something and I may have cut her off.
No, it's okay. I'm Manveer. I just want to say that, like, I agree with the Shudeep that the decision making role and confidence, these things, it's not like there is no institute you can get it. You will grow up with these things. Like, if the family give you opportunity from very beginning about the decision making authority, when you'll be completed an MBA or something, you are not going to look here and there to find someone to take your decision. Even though, like, I find it out all of the myself and other times we find it out, even though like women get educated, because this decision making skill we do not have, because we did not grow up like this way. Still, when we try to take a decision, we just want that someone will help me to take the decision,
Mhm.
because it's kind of habit. It's kind of like a mentality we grew up with these things. And I just want to tell you that international women's international students and everyone, the young age women are very vulnerable. Like when they go outside in Bangladesh also, like we cannot walk alone, because we find it out someone will going to touch your body part without asking you, and you feel shame, but they don't feel shame. So like we just want that we have to start to fight against these things. One of the young women of our community fight against an instructor, complain about this sexual harassment. I find it out the community feel that, oh my goodness, she tried to expose these things and she is shameless or girls. But we have to stand up beside this person and said that you have all right to complain these things and you have all right to stand up these things. Yeah, like rather than it's not a solution that I'm going to go to the women driver, so then I'm not going to get kind of harassment. Like, why should I? We should create a kind of things that fear to the people on all these men to see that, okay, uh, how you should treat us. Like it's not going to be like I'm so sorry because we could not make the footprint for all of you like this because we tolerate that. So we ask you, Manvir, please tolerate these things, don't tell anything, it's shameful, because we make this footprint, that's how you follow this footprint. But this is the time, like you see our gray hair, we are fighting and we get the gray hair because but we want all of you young generation, you're my like my daughter. My daughter is also in the like a master degree in studying in UFT in social work. I always tell them that don't follow our footprint, break it. I'm with you, but break it. I could not break it. That doesn't mean that you should not break it. You break it, then that is our inspiration. The please break it. We are with you. We are helping you to break this thing. We're not going to criticize you. We're going to hold you like this way. Manvir, please break the rule. Thank you.
Thank you, Sultana. That's so sweet. I think that, yeah, that's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. And I appreciate the fact that I think now it's, again, like we have role models in the community, like all of you, to tell us that, that it's time to do something about it and it's time to change that. So thank you so much. I feel like I've taken over this conversation. I'll please, if anybody else wants to say anything.
I was just going to add that I really do appreciate that so many of us are collectively like saying that we should be breaking the pattern and we should be like going against the norm. But I've noticed, unfortunately, that in my personal circle, a lot of the older women kind of have an internalized misogyny that they don't they kind of feel attacked personally if you want to go against the norm. So like what kind of, do you guys have any tips on like how we can encourage them to not take it personally, that we want to break from the intergenerational trauma and it's nothing personal to them because they've also been victimized and they've also been subjected to it. So do you have any tips on like how we can have this conversation constructively? This is to anyone who wants to answer, by the way. Yes.
Man said just one thing, like, yeah, we feel it like sometimes we feel like offended that if you are going against this normal. But, we start the discussion in the community. It's called mother-daughter discussion, an intergenerational gap. The solution is like we sometimes complain a lot that, oh, my kids are in the internet whole day, whatever she does, she's in the computer, she's not helping us to do the homework, housework, cleaning and everything. This is the normal work for the women. She has to learn how to cook from us. Like these kind of stereotype things, we just every time try to say this thing. But one of the meeting, one of our girls outburst and say, yes, I don't know how to cook, but I help you to do all the billing. I'm your hands in Canada because you don't know how to handle the computer. So like if I can do that things, you cannot do these things. You can learn from this. I can learn from you how to cooking, but we need to be bonding together rather than criticizing us. I never criticize you that how come you are an older woman like 45 to 50, you don't know how to handle the computer. So like sometimes the girls are taking all of these things and keep mouth shut because they love their parents. But sometimes you have to showing them that, yeah, I don't know how to cook, but I help you to pay the bill every month because you don't know how to handle the computer. I don't have time to help you to, cooking because I'm studying in here and focusing. I have to go in my school and come back at 10 p.m. because my schedule is like this. A lot of discussion need to be done in the community because this intergenerational gap create kind of finding a kind of mentality to you that, okay, we don't want to go to the older generation. They are very sensitive. But this is not the way we can make a very vibrant community. The solution is like bonding. So like the women should has to be opening the discussion, talk with the Mariam. We should we need to make a kind of circle to women and girls to bring that together, mother and daughters, and start the discussion. Because in our community sometimes you find it out, mother is associated with the father to do the gender discrimination with the girls, pushing the girls to say, you are a girl, you should stay home, you have to take the permission from your father, when the mother has the authority to give the permission, but wait for the father because I cannot give the permission. So the disempowerment the women start from the home. So like we need to fix our family, then fix the society, then fix the country. Until we are not fixing our family, we cannot fix our society. So let's start to work together to fix our society. That my mom need an equal voice of my father. So then my sisters need equal voice to my brother to take the decision of the property, decision of the every single day's decision. So then if we can treat equally in the family, we can treat equally in the society. And it takes time, but it is the time to open the gate. If we are late, then we're going to find it out next generation 10 years behind again, because we are 20 years behind the Canadian born women all of the way. So like this behindness will never bring the advancing gender equality. If we are not merging, we're going to be left behind. Sorry.
Thank you so much.
I'm taking a lot of space. Sorry for this thing, but all of these young women, I said that this is the time. Face back to your own community and say that open up the leadership opportunity for us in the family, in the society, in every place.
Thank you.
Maria, I'm just going to jump in, and I'm going to jump in because I'm the oldest of the group, and I know I'm the oldest. And so there is a two-pronged approach to what you said. Number one, making those changes. or having conversations. You can make the change and have the conversation at the same time. I broke a lot of gender stereotypes within my family. I'm a single woman. I still do not cook. My partner's gone to Windsor, so I'm on to this. Seriously, don't cook. Um, there are always going to be pushbacks. The thing is, how do you can't be defensive in having those conversations within your community. But the most important thing is, how clearly do you see or envision what mold are you breaking? If you have one of the things that I used with my older aunts who are still in the village, when I divorced, I was the one who divorced. It was a huge, I mean, and I divorced at a very late age. It was a matter of huge shame for them. So I just started having those conversations. The best approach that worked for me was asking them, I have heard you, and I'm so sorry I'm going to use the word, really bitch about your life with your husband all these years. And what have you done about it? I'm happier. I don't have somebody constantly telling me what to do, what not to do, while he didn't do anything. Just a rich, spoiled brat who I always thought I had 3 kids. 2 grew up to be independent adults. He did. So at what point do you actually become responsible for your own happiness? Yes, those conversations will be difficult, but you also have to take a step. So you can't just say, let's have conversations, and by then they will begin to accept the changes. No, the changes sometimes just have to happen. And then, of course, you can simultaneously have the conversations.
They want to.
I'm sorry?
They'll come along if they want to.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes, yes.
Thank you.
I don't have any direct experience in this regard, but and certainly many of my clients, they're I think face similar challenges. Like they themselves adopt a very kind of a traditional role. They may even be in an abusive relationship, but they subscribe to certain kind of sort of I guess understanding of the role between a man and woman in a relationship. And usually it's only when certain crisis happens and they will then have no choice but to seek help. So for instance, when the relationship break down, the husband wouldn't even sponsor them anymore. Then they will come forward to seek help. But at the same time, I also see that oftentimes it's difficult to have this kind of conversation with my clients. Like even as I'm helping them deal with their immigration case or whatnot, you can't really convince them about, maybe there's something beyond what you're kind of coming to me about. But I think I agree, like, sort of it is important to have this kind of conversation as whether it's service providers or in other roles that we play. Like, we recently, because of the COVID-19, in a way, I think it creates an opportunities for us to have these hard conversations. So like a parallel example to that is that before COVID, like a lot of Chinese don't even want to talk about racism. Like, it's like it's like you can't even get them to acknowledge there's racism, even when it's happening to them. They will still think that it's something else. Like it's not because of my race, like, it's something else. But I think really COVID kind of opens the eyes of a lot of people, and they started to question, at least they will say, does this thing happens to me, do you think it's racism, right? So and that kind of gives us an opening to talk about what racism looks like, what is race, what is whatever. And I think maybe we are at this we are at the stage where we can have also that kind of parallel conversation about sort of like the gender inequality, right? And, given the very stark reality that women are facing today. And I think even some parents, they may, even if they have certain expectations about what their girls should behave, I'm sure they still want them to succeed. So, like maybe a way of entering into conversation is about how do we prepare our girls to succeed in the Canadian society, right? And I think that Sultana's point about mother-daughter conversation is very important. Maybe CASSA and Sauro and whoever like want to have some joint project, creating some ways of sort of tools or whatever to have to facilitate this kind of conversation, and I'm sure I can borrow that for the Chinese clients as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much. Sorry, did I interrupt someone?
No, I was just saying thank you.
Oh, great.
Avi and Dina, are you both still there? I just have an absolutely crazy revolutionary idea for you guys. Hi, Avi. So I was just thinking, and it's just been my it's a subjective experience. There's no um, empirical data behind it. So because I come from Windsor, it was a union city, a manufacturing union city. Now I've had some union experience here. A lot of my union experience has been a lot to do with racism. So unions in Canada are labor movements only for white men. And then comes white women. The reason I said that I have an absolutely crazy idea is that immigrant women should have a union that is separate from them and then go on 1 day strike every week for the frontline work, for them to recognize why we need paid sick days and childcare. I can be very fantastical.
Thank you, Sudip. That is the things like we need a third party kind of in the union to collect all these women, those who are in the precarious job sector, and give them some kind of support to defend their right, because they don't have anyone to talk on behalf of them. And yeah, union is totally white. It's not like talking for any brown people right or racialized people right.
Great. So at least now we have a new idea. We can all start a union together. Well, thank you everyone so much for attending this talk and for taking time. I'm sure everyone's super busy with the pandemic. I feel like it just made everything much more busier. Um, and just some points that I think everyone really mentioned and are so important. I mean, the biggest one I think being with the temporary work, that a lot of the South Asian women and a lot of immigrants aren't protected because of their temporary work status, or because they're always living in fear of being fired if they speak up. So how can we change that? And the fact that COVID-19 has made it worse. We actually spoke to Shalini Kunur for Salco, and she was telling us about a case in which a woman got fired, a South Asian woman, because she didn't come to work just because she thought she had been exposed to COVID, someone who had COVID. So to be safe, she didn't come to work. And because of that, she got fired because she didn't have any paid sick days left. So, and one of our CASSA projects is actually on it. We're doing sort of raising awareness around COVID-19 and how it's affecting South Asian communities. Because if you notice in the news, there's a lot of negative articles surrounding South Asian communities, whereas it's not because South Asian people don't believe in COVID. It's because literally they're working in precarious working conditions. They have to go to their jobs. They work on front lines. They're exposed to COVID much more than other people, and then they don't have paid sick leave if they need to take it. I really also appreciate the part about that everyone highlighted, that women's job doesn't just stop at their work. They come back and they're still working. They're working for their families, and not just children. It's also intergenerational families. So it's also your parents, your grandparents, and as when we mentioned even your pets, which is so true. I was just thinking about my own mom. Like we have a pet. she does everything for him, and now I feel bad. And yeah, the the pandemic has really worsened it. And what Avi also mentioned, that 10 times more women have left the job market, and they are probably not going to come back because you have online schooling. So of course, the children are home. The women are going to have to be the ones to stay back at home and take care of them. And I also really appreciate all the comments that everyone made about mobilizing, that we have to go beyond just sort of policy recommendations or reports, because we all know what the issues are. As I even mentioned in a report, CASSA has been fighting for this for the past 30 years since it was created, and it's still really not, we still haven't destroyed those barriers that South Asian immigrants face and when finding work. So everyone knows what the issues are. Everyone knows what kind of issues South Asian communities face. So I think it is time to mobilize, and the union idea is absolutely great. So with that, and I will just end it on what Sultana said, which I thought was an amazing point, which is that we need to fix our families, we need to fix our society, but then we need to fix our country. So thank you so much. And I really appreciate everyone being here and participating at our Women's International Day. If there's anything you need, please email me. Everyone has my email. And yeah, have a nice day. Thank you.
You. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye. Okay, great. Okay, we're still live on Facebook. So I guess if I end it, it'll end it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you, Sakshi.
See you.
See you later.